Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about Total War and discussion about Creative Assembly, because things aren't going so well at the moment for Creative Assembly or for Total War. In fact, things are going very poorly, especially over the last 2 months. I'll get into why exactly things have devolved the way they have for both Total War and Creative Assembly, but suffice it to say, Creative Assembly keeps pouring gasoline on the fire that they started, I should add. There's no one to blame but them. Let's be clear on this. You can say, oh, it's the fan base, it's X, Y, and Z. No, the only people that are responsible for this current situation, it's not even Sega. It is CA themselves. They've made these decisions that have led to the current situation, and now they're going to pay for it. They are paying for it. And what's making the situation worse is what CA has decided to do. So they made a lengthy post on Steam, and one thing I want to highlight in this Steam post is the following statement. The right to discuss is a privilege, it is not an entitlement you earn by playing the game. And in our official spaces, we will prioritize the ability of those who demonstrate that they can converse and disagree thoughtfully, constructively, and inclusively over those who aim to disrupt, derail, and diminish those contributions. To which I reply, CA, criticism doesn't necessarily need to be polite, I want to point out. In fact, if people are screaming at you, diminishing that they're screaming at you, diminishing their criticism because they're screaming at you doesn't get you anything. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm a YouTuber. I deal with negative comments every day. And I'm going to be blunt and honest about it. Yes, sometimes banning people or removing their comments when they're just being assholes is perfectly acceptable. But here's the thing. Only to the degree that you're just dealing with a couple of bad actors. Like if you're dealing with a couple of negative comments, that's one thing. But if you've got an entire community up in arms, like as a YouTuber, as a company, it doesn't matter. If you've got an overwhelming portion of your fan base up in arms against you, and they're criticizing you either politely or not, or constructively or not, then you've got a major issue. And banning the people that are not engaging in constructive criticism and then making a post like this is just going to piss off a lot more people, because what it's really showing, what it's creating the situation where, and the perception, the rifle perception really, that you're just trying to silence anyone that's criticizing you. You're trying to stifle discussion, you're trying to stifle criticism, you're trying to silence people under the banner of like constructive criticism. That's how this comes off as. Again, there is a time and place to remove comments, ban people. Perma-banning someone is, a bit much, I feel, especially given the negative consequences that happen on Steam. Perma-banning someone because they left a mean comment, and even then, like, people were have been banned for like meme comments or for insignificant comments. Really, at the end of the day, we're not talking about people who just were outright bashing Creative Assembly. We're not just talking about those kind of people. We're talking about the good number of people that have been banned for relatively minor things, because right now CA has suffered one disaster after another, and they're kind of trying to control the narrative. That's how it feels like this, and it is one of the worst decisions they can make. Like, ignore the moral arguments or how, the right to discuss is not the privilege, it is a right, a fundamental one as well. Sure, we can talk about technical aspects or all that, but that's how people feel it. And when you ban people from discussing, and you're banning a lot of people, and we're not talking here, again, a couple of people, we're talking here a significant number of people that are criticizing them for many good reasons. There's a saying, there's a saying that I grew up with. Like, if one person calls you insane, then maybe that's their problem. But if 3 people call you insane, if 3 people are calling you out, basically, then you've got a genuine issue on your hands. Because whether or not they're right or wrong, it does mean that the perception that you've created of yourself is a very negative one. And this is the problem for Creative Assembly. And mind you, it's not just a perception issue for Creative Assembly. is a genuine issue with what they've done, but they're certainly creating a very negative image among the community with these kind of actions. It is never a good idea to start massive ban waves against people, unless you were talking like, again, a couple of people that are trolling, deliberately trolling. That's fine. Mass ban waves, not good. Not a great idea. But why exactly have things degenerated to this particular level? And what can happen going forward? The current situation pretty much started with Shadows of Change. And a lot of people, including myself, we were not very happy with the price increase. It was not a justifiable price increase. And to be honest, beyond the price, the increase in price, which was very significant, I should add, we also got ultimately less content, because one of the main things that matters with the DLC pack, and has mattered for years, we're talking here over half a decade when we're talking about the Warhammer Total War games, one of the things that Creative Assembly has done for half a decade with DLC after DLC after DLC is they've introduced substantive racial changes for at least one of the races that was affected by the DLC. This did not happen with Shadows of Change. They did not introduce substantive fixes, changes, bug fixes, hot fixes, you name it. In fact, they created more issues than there were before with Shadows of Change. So you have a very expensive DLC that isn't that great, that isn't introducing the racial changes that Siege and Kislev in particular needed. They introduced some changes for Cafe, but it's like smaller changes, not the complete major rework, racial rework, as we had seen before with pretty much every single Lord pack that had been released since either Queen of the Crown or Prophet and Warlock. Depends on how you want to view Prophet and Warlock, and whether or not that represented a substantive change for the Skaven as a race. I'd argue it kind of did, maybe it kind of did to some extent, but even so, even if you're counting Prophet and Warlock, again, you're still looking at really half a decade since we've had any DLC that is as bad as Shadows of Changes. And Queen of the Crown, and also Prophet and Warlock, were nowhere near as expensive. And also, one of the things to point out about like Queen of the Crown did have free DLC lords, because you also got to leave an R at the same time as a free lord. Now they're asking a lot more for basically the same kind of content. It is not a great situation what Creative Assembly has done. Also, Rob Bartholomew's post about profits being down or revenue being down and effectively threatening the community. Some people want to argue that point. It is a threat. It is basically saying that, hey, if people are not buying the DLC enough, we will just cut support for the game. And that kind of statement is just going to piss off people, and it did piss off a significant number of people. For my part, I'm part of the content creator program. Like, when I saw the changes or lack of changes for Kislev, I was red with fury. And I really struggled to restrain myself in the videos I did on the subject, though I also pushed as hard as I could to talk about like how little they had changed with that. But my initial reaction was, with regards to Shadows of Change, once I saw Stankia's campaign, was that is a piece of crap. So that's the first thing. So you have the situation of Shadows of Change. You have the overall situation with Warhammer 3, where there's been many issues since the launch of Warhammer 3 that are still present in game. The siege situation, the range situation, the many problems, bugs, glitches of Immortal Empires, the overall handling of Warhammer 3, the way Realms of Chaos was initially handled, the way they're handling things going forward, the price increases increased more recently. I mean, Chaos Wars was a great DLC, but it was not fine for them to increase the price as much as they did. And for them to ask the same price for Shadows of Change as they did for Forge of the Chaos Dwarves was bloody ridiculous. I mean, Forge of the Chaos Dwarves on terrain alone offers significantly more than what Shadows of Change did. Like, there's a lot of things to talk about when it comes to like Warhammer 3, but it's not just Warhammer 3. We also have to talk about Hyenas. So Creative Assembly finished wasting $100 million, hiring hundreds of people to work specifically on Hyenas, and then they canceled the game just before launch because no one was interested in it. It ended up being an unmitigated disaster. It is the single worst game that Creative Assembly has ever put money and effort on, because they didn't even release it to make anything back. The biggest disaster in the history of the company, far surpassing something like Empire or Rome 2. Because remember, Empire and Rome 2 did still sell. Regardless of the controversy, there were still significant sales for both Empire and Rome 2. There's still actually quite a few people who are like, oh, Rome 2 is actually pretty good right now. It isn't. That's where I stand, and I've played a lot of these games, and I've been playing them ever since they came out, one way or another. Rome 2 is still not a great game, but we gotta remember, Rome 2, Free Kingdoms, they made money. Thrones of Britannia didn't. That's a different discussion. But this is Hyenas ended up being a far bigger disaster because they didn't make any money back. Whereas with Thrones, at least they sold some copies. Yes, the reception was pretty poor, but you can imagine they sold, 100,000 copies easily, because Thrones did have 20,000 concurrent players at one point, which, by the way, is on par with how Warhammer 3 is at the moment. And then, to cap it all off, we have Total War Pharaoh, the single worst release in the history of the company, that started with 5,000 concurrent players and has dropped off a cliff. The last I looked at it, it was below 2,000. It wouldn't surprise me that by the time this video is uploaded, that Total War Pharaoh has less than 1,000. And that isn't a great situation for Creative Assembly. The fact that Shadows of Change was not handled very well, that a lot of the community, a lot of the player base didn't react to it very favorably for good reasons, I would add, that Hyenas one that was then canceled, and then that Pharaoh ended up being a complete and utter disaster. Actually, right now, just an update on a statement, as I'm recording this video right now, just as I'm bringing SteamDB up, there's less than 1,000 active users at the moment in Total War Pharaoh, concurrent players. It is dead. Like, it died on arrival. It is a very sad state of affairs, what happened with Pharaoh. Like, I personally had hoped, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I've been very clear that I think Pharaoh has been the worst release in the history of Creative Assembly, the worst Total War game that's ever been released, and that's what I posted in my review, very, very clearly. I had hoped that someone who actually liked Troy, because there were things that were fairly enjoyable in Troy, systems that were well designed. The economy system, for instance, was pretty solid. I had hoped with Pharaoh, like, people say it's a reskin of Troy. I'm going to go further and say Pharaoh is actually worse than Troy. Like, yeah, Troy is the better game. Like, it has the worst map. Like, the map and the balance between Achaeans and Trojans is not great. But, like, in terms of campaign systems, in terms of unit variety, in terms of just playstyle, yeah, Troy is the better game. Like, granted, it's because of the myth units. It's also because of the DLCs to an extent. But even without DLCs, Troy is just flat out the better game between Pharaoh and Troy. It feels like CA Sophia, yes, they did some things well with Pharaoh. They have some good campaign mechanics. But that's about it. The battle system is a mess. And right now, with Pharaoh, I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be better if CA just canceled the development of the DLCs for that. Because they did offer those DLCs as a pre-order bonus, and people are no longer playing the game. I'm really curious to see what CA is going to do with that. Probably they're going to release them. Very few people are going to be interested, unless it's something extraordinary, but I really do think that Total Pharaoh is just, it died on arrival, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily surprised, because it was very clear before launch how people were going to react to that, but Pharaoh certainly ended up being a disaster. You have 3 disasters, one after another. Shadows of Change, Hyenas, and now Total War Pharaoh. And people are up in arms. And it is a fairly extraordinary situation for the Total War community, because for many years, the fan base, the rabid fanboys, defended everything that Creative Assembly had done. Oh, Rome 2 comes out and it's a pile of crap, or Empire comes out and it's a pile of crap, or DLC practices, unit packs, horrible DLC practices, the Blood Pack that they introduced to Shogun 2. All of that was accepted by the community one way or another. Many things were accepted, many things were defended. In fact, in the lead up of Warhammer 1, this is probably the most revealing story about the Total War fanbase. Like, in the lead up of Warhammer 1, there were plenty of people who were preemptively justifying how Warhammer 1 was going to be a really horrible game. What do I mean by that? There were people who were justifying, oh, they're not going to add magic, they're not going to have monstrous units, single entities, or anything like that. They were just basically going to do more or less a mod based on the Rome 2 engine. Oh, they're not going to have 64-bit, and the performance is not going to be improved. There were so many people for so many years who defended the absolutely horrible performance we used to get, and we still have in Attila and Rome 2, the horrible performance that we got in those games because they were 32-bit games. Like with Warhammer 1, there was the Warriors of Chaos situation. Sure, a lot of people were angry about that, but there were, again, a lot of people that defended Creative Assembly. Now, of course, once Warhammer 1 launched, that criticism became more muted, though there were still an enormous number of people that were very unhappy about the handling of Warriors of Chaos, and that they were very clear. Like, this is the thing. Being critical of something is well and good even when you buy it. In fact, that's kind of the point. That's how people should perhaps view things. Like, you check things out and you're not a fanboy. You're not blind to the issues. You call them out. But no, you get accused of being negative. And but what about the sellouts on YouTube? What about the content creators? You know, as a content creator, I'm going to say it bluntly. The biggest problem for a content creator, like, you can't embrace negativity as a content creator. Unless you're someone like Voland, then you can do so, sure. But unless you want to make a fan base focused on that kind of negativity, it's not really going to work out for you. For a lot of people, it's just not going to work out. One fellow content creator with regards to World of Warcraft said it best to me. The people who are interested in negative comments are people who aren't necessarily playing the game, but you want to appeal ultimately to the people who are playing the game who are not interested in that. And that is true. And this is the thing, like, as long as the community justified it, you can blame content creators, you can blame the sellouts, you can blame the people who rose to the top by being sellouts for effectively marketing the game for Creative Assembly. Sure, you can do so. But one thing that shouldn't be ignored is the role that the fan base, the community, the Total War community had to play in all of this, because it was the only logical outcome given everything that people defended over years. The fact, however, that the Total War community has had enough reveals how extraordinary the situation currently is, because they really have had enough. We've seen with Pharaoh, people are not going to buy a crappy Total War game just because it's a Total War game. We're reaching that point. This is not like Blizzard. Like, just to make a comparison, with Blizzard Entertainment, yes, there's a lot of criticism. Yes, player base is like, Diablo 4 is a dead game at the moment, effectively. But with the Blizzard games, at least people buy them initially. With Creative Assembly is not Blizzard. They don't have that kind of rabid fan base. They don't have so many millions of people that will just literally buy a game just to check it out when it initially comes out. They don't have that kind of power, and they've burnt a lot of bridges with their actions more recently. And in fact, I would dare say Creative Assembly handles things worse than Blizzard, which is an extraordinary feat in of itself when we're talking about like how Creative Assembly talks to their community, how it handles their community. There's a level of arrogance that you feel like from people within Creative Assembly when it comes to dealing with the fan base. And then at this point, with hundreds of people being fired from Creative Assembly after the cancellation of Hyenas particular, we started getting a lot of leaks, because guess what? A lot of people that are working within Creative Assembly are pissed at what's been going on. Now, I want to be very clear on this. I'm not sure how much you want to trust these leaks, because they're coming from people like Bellular and Voland, who they have every interest in, playing this up. Like, remember, they're gonna make money based on this, and I know that's an accusation you can always make, right? But they certainly have an interest in playing this kind of thing up. But at the same time, they are people like Voland is certainly someone who has perhaps more credibility on the subject. I don't like him. I think he's a jackass, to be quite honest. Though, when things start repeating themselves and you're getting multiple sources, then you start getting a clearer picture and you start realizing that, yes, there is truth to what is being said. Maybe not everything, sure, but there's quite a bit of truth to the situation. Like, Creative Assembly did not handle that situation well by issuing a copyright strike against Voland, which YouTube itself denied, which is, by the way, in itself fairly extraordinary, because YouTube generally will not deny a copyright strike, I have to say. If they do so, like, they're basically willing to say this is so farcical and so clearly wrong that we are going to step in, because YouTube never wants that risk unless they're absolutely certain that there isn't any risk at all. Because remember, if it was a legitimate copyright strike or had any potential of being a legitimate copyright strike, and let's say, Creative Assembly could take, say, Voland to a court of law if they wanted to, if that were to happen and they would win, that would be pretty bad news for YouTube. It's not going to happen for clear reasons. And that's what YouTube thinks about it. Like, it's like, yeah, this is a farce of a situation with Creative Assembly. And Creative Assembly is like misinformation. That's their perspective. They're trying to silence people. They're trying to silence their criticism. And really, what they've actually achieved, they've given people like Voland significantly more power than they had otherwise. Which, yeah, it's backfired. In a fairly in an enormous fashion, it has backfired what they have done. It has been one disaster after another disaster. Shadows has changed statement. Hyenas, now the leaks, Pharaoh, now copyright strike, and banning people from the forums. Creative Assembly may have managed in a period of just 2 months to lose an enormous portion of their fan base. In a way that I don't think I've seen any other major video game company manage to do it in such a spectacular fashion. But there you go. If you treat people like trash, and if you just are a trash company and act like a trash company, this is what you're going to get ultimately. Like, this is what happens when a company is so obsessed about like short-term term gains that they ignore long-term issues, because it was very clear that we were eventually going to reach this point one way or another. In fact, one of the concerns I've had for quite a bit now is I've been wondering to myself, okay, we have Warhammer 3 at the moment. Like, this has been my thought process. We have Warhammer 3. Like, ever since Immortal Empires beta came out. We have Immortal Empires. We have DLC. But what comes next? What other Total War comes out that's going to be able to achieve even a quarter of the success that we've seen from Warhammer as a series, considering how much content Warhammer 3 has? I admit I did kind of expect it to happen later down the line, like kind of once the content was released, and I kind of expected the next major Total War release, and not Pharaoh, to be clear. Like, Pharaoh I think was going to be dead in the water, but I kind of expected a lot of issues to like blow up with the next major, really big, real Total War release, the next major Total War game, not the saga game that Pharaoh is. I expected perhaps some of these issues to happen then, because you have an untenable situation right now between Creative Assembly and its fans, and with the community, but it's happened beforehand because of a combination of factors, right? The price increase. If they hadn't increased the price of Shadows of Change, there still would have been a controversy because of the lack of changes. Then the cancellation of Hyenas coming shortly after that. Then the release of Pharaoh. And then, of course, Creative Assembly's PR actions have led to this situation. What comes next? Well, I'm going to tell you what comes next. Thrones of Decay better be a damn good DLC, because if it's not, that's it. There's no coming back from it. Like, Thrones of Decay is the final point. If they don't release it this year, as they stated they would, if they do not release it this year, and it's an extraordinary piece of content, and if they don't lower the price as well, if they also revise their PR strategy, things are not going to go well for them at all. It is going to blow up in their faces. And there's already a lot of people who are really done with Creative Assembly. So let me be clear. Thrones of Decay is not going to do as well financially, likely, as Forge of Chaos Dwarfs. It has no chance. Like, given everything that's happened, but they can start rebuilding trust. Like, this is a thing that Creative Assembly needs to understand from my perspective. For them to recover from this, it's going to take them years. It's going to take them multiple DLC packs. It's going to take them doing a great job with every bit of DLC that comes out from this point onward for Warhammer 3, and to not deliver another miserable release for their next major Total War game. And even then, it might not be enough, because there's competition on the horizon. Again, I emphasize that Total War is getting burnt to the ground. It's collapsing, even when there isn't competition. And if any competitor, genuine competitor, arises, maybe Ultimate General American Revolution could be one. Maybe not. I mean, it's going to be released in early access, so we'll see about that. But despite that, like, it's collapsing. This company, the series is collapsing, and on itself, despite not having any genuine competition. But like, once you start factoring things like Manor Lords and other stuff, it is not going to go very well for Creative Assembly. So they need to rebuild the trust the community had in them. They need to do things differently. They can't keep the prices as they are. If they keep the prices as they are and release Thrones of Decay with the same price as Shadows of Change, even if the quality is better, and oh dear, don't even get me started. They could lower the price to $12 for Thrones of Decay, but if they do not introduce major racial reworks for at least the Empire and Dwarves, and really Nurgle deserves it too, but Empire, if they do not introduce major racial reworks for Empire and Dwarves to fix the issues the Dwarves and Empire have, to really improve their campaigns, that is going to be it. If you think that people were pissed off about Shadows of Change, I need to point out the Empire and Dwarves are two of the most popular races in the community, and if you screw it up with them, that's pretty much it for Warhammer 3, at least. And what happens for Creative Assembly after that, we will see, but it's probably not going to be that good. Am I hopeful about the future? Honestly, I don't know. Like, certainly things have blown up in Creative Assembly's face, but I'll be blunt, they blow up in their face before. Like, Empire should have been a wake-up call. It wasn't. Rome 2 should have been a wake-up call. It wasn't. X, Y, and Z should have been a wake-up call. They weren't. But I'll grant you, this situation currently is an extraordinary situation, and it's everything, like, combined, happening at once, and maybe this does become the wake-up call. One of the leaks that's come out indicates that Sega apparently has taken a more active interest in what's happening in Creative Assembly. That before that, Sega was very hands-off as to what's happening in Creative Assembly. And this brings me to a final point I want to make. That we always have this discussion when something like this happens, that, oh, it's management, it's the people on top. No, I don't believe, though, that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do believe that people in charge of Creative Assembly have made really bad decisions. To be sure, they've screwed up. But I also think that there's also plenty of regular developers in Creative Assembly that don't know what the hell they're doing. And we're seeing We're seeing that unfold right now. I'll be honest, I think even there's plenty of people in CA Sofia who don't know what the hell they're doing. And you can chalk it up to engine issues, you can chalk it up to management, you can blame whoever you want. There are plenty of people in CA themselves, like regular employees, who don't know what they're doing. Things need to change with the way they're handling Total War as a series, with the way they're handling their games in general, and the way they're handling their community. If they don't, Blizzard survives because Blizzard had an enormous amount of power to the degree very few other gaming companies had. Make no mistake, Blizzard is certainly declining. Creative Assembly is not Blizzard. Gonna make that point. Costin here, signing out. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And stay tuned for more videos. Probably going to play some Shogun 2. I think I'm just going to do that for the next couple of days, weeks, however long it will be. And who knows, maybe Thrones of Decay will be an extraordinary piece of content. We can only hope, right?